The Lagos heat felt heavy, even inside the chilled heights of the Victoria Island penthouse. Zola stared at the reflection in the floor-to-ceiling windows. The red satin of her pajamas seemed to glow against her deep-toned skin, but her eyes looked haunted. 2 years. They had been married for 2 years, yet for the last 3 days, Marcus had been a ghost. Business meetings that never ended and calls that went straight to voicemail. The king-size bed felt like a desert. With her heart hammering against her ribs, Zola picked up her phone. She needed to remind him of what he was missing. She needed to feel like a wife again, not a systems analyst buried in data. Her thumbs flew across the screen, the words searing. "Baby, I'm dripping wet. I'm waiting in the red silk you love. Come home and claim what's yours." She didn't let herself overthink it. She hit send. The little blue bubble pulsed once, then vanished into the digital ether. Zola let out a breath she'd been holding, tucking her long wavy hair behind her ear as she waited for the typing. Bubbles to appear. Outside, the city lights of Lagos flickered, oblivious to the fact that her world was about to tilt on its axis. 7,000 miles away in Seoul, South Korea. The air was crisp and smelled of rain and expensive tobacco. Shin Jae-ha stood on his balcony overlooking the neon-drenched Han River. His white shirt was unbuttoned to the waist, the fabric catching on the intricate floral tattoos that crawled up his muscular chest. A permanent map of his rise to Dragon Head of the Beko Syndicate. His life was a series of cold calculations, shipments, and blood. There was no room for accidents. His phone buzzed on the obsidian desk behind him. A notification light blinked, an international code. Plus 234. Lagos. Jae-ha reached back, intending to silence the device. He dealt with politicians and arms dealers, not unknown numbers from West Africa. But a flicker of curiosity stayed his hand. He picked it up, his thumb sliding across the screen. As he read the words intended for a failing husband, a slow, dangerous smirk pulled at the corner of his mouth. It had been 5 years since anything had truly surprised him. Dripping wet, he murmured to the empty, cold Seoul skyline. "Well, little siren, you have my attention." The silence in the Victoria Island penthouse was a heavy, physical thing, louder than the tropical rain drumming against the floor-to-ceiling glass. Zola stood in the center of the living room, surrounded by the cold luxury Marcus insisted on. White marble, Italian leather, and obsidian accents that felt like they were staring at her with judgment. As a systems analyst, Zola lived for patterns and logic, but there was no logic left in a 2-year marriage that had turned into a ghost story. It had been 3 days since she'd seen him. No calls, just a terse staying late at the office, text that felt like a slap. She looked at the sprawling view of Lagos, a sea of flickering lights and dark, churning water, and felt utterly invisible. She was a woman who could dismantle a high-level mainframe in minutes, yet she couldn't find the code to unlock her own husband's heart. The red satin of her pajamas felt like a costume, a desperate attempt to play a role she was rapidly losing. Her skin, deep and lustrous under the dim chandelier light, felt cold despite the humid Lagos heat. She picked up her phone, the screen glowing like a small, digital sun in the darkened room. Her fingers trembled as she stared at Marcus's contact name. "Fix it," a voice whispered in her head. "Remind him that you're still here. Remind him what he's throwing away." She opened their chat, scrolling past her own unanswered, "I love you," from the night before. With a breath that hitched in her throat, she began to type. The words felt illicit, a siren's call sent from a place of total isolation. "Baby, I'm dripping wet. I'm waiting in the red silk you love. Come home and claim what's yours." She glanced at the number, or thought she did. Her eyes, blurred by a cocktail of exhaustion and unshed tears, missed the single digit that had been altered during a recent, unexplained contact sync error. To her, it looked like Marcus. To the global satellites overhead, It was a bridge to a much darker world. Zola pressed send. The whoosh of the delivered message felt like a guillotine blade dropping. She dropped the phone onto the velvet sofa, her heart racing with a mix of shame and terrifying hope. She imagined Marcus at his desk, seeing the notification, feeling the spark reignite. She didn't know that 7,000 miles away, in a city of neon and steel, a man who dealt in blood and shadows was watching his phone light up with her vulnerability. She didn't know that by trying to save her marriage, she had just invited a dragon into her life. Seoul was a city of glass and secrets, and tonight, both were drenched in a cold, relentless rain. Shin Jae-ha stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows of his private sanctuary, the neon signage of the Gangnam district reflecting in his dark, unreadable eyes. His white dress shirt was unbuttoned halfway down his chest, revealing the intricate, ink-black floral tattoos that bloomed across his muscular torso, a permanent, beautiful warning of his status as the dragon head of the Baekho Syndicate. The buzz of his phone on the obsidian desk was a sharp intrusion into the silence. Jae-ha didn't expect messages at 3 a.m. unless a shipment had been seized or a rival was dead. When he saw the plus 234 country code, his brow arched in silent curiosity. Then, he read the words. "Baby, I'm dripping wet. I'm waiting in the red silk you love. Come home and claim what's yours." A low, gravelly chuckle escaped his throat, a sound that rarely graced the halls of his compound. It was absurd. It was audacious. In his world, a single mistake usually resulted in a shallow grave, but this was a different kind of error entirely. He sat at his terminal, his long, scarred fingers dancing over a specialized keyboard with the grace of a pianist. He didn't just rule with muscle, he ruled with data. Within minutes, the dragon head had bypassed 3 layers of international firewalls. The number belonged to a Zola Benjamin in Lagos, Nigeria, a systems analyst with a record of brilliance that rivaled his own tech teams. But as he dug deeper into the digital footprint of her household, his amusement curdled into a cold, predatory interest. He pulled up a hidden subdirectory linked to her husband, Marcus. The man wasn't a businessman. He was a ghost, a high-level operative for the Viper Tong, Jae-ha's most vicious rivals. The realization hit with the force of a physical blow. Marcus hadn't married Zola for love. He was using her high-level access to the Incheon port's digital infrastructure to facilitate a catastrophic cyber hijack. Jae-ha leaned back, the blue light of the monitor illuminating the sharp angles of his face and the dangerous smirk playing on his lips. The woman in the red silk was a lamb being led to the slaughter by a man who didn't deserve her. She had reached out for intimacy, but she had accidentally summoned a dragon. "Wrong number, little bird," Jae-ha whispered into the empty, cold soul night. "But you just found the only man who can help you kill a viper." The Lagos rain had slowed to a rhythmic tap, but the storm inside the penthouse was only beginning. Zola's phone didn't chime with Marcus's familiar tone. Instead, a low, vibrating hum resonated through the marble nightstand. An encrypted file appeared from the same unknown international number. "Open your eyes, systems analyst," the accompanying text read. "The man you love is a fiction." Her professional instincts overrode her heartbreak. She dragged her laptop onto the bed, her fingers flying across the keys to decrypt the incoming black box file. As the data populated, her blood turned to ice. It wasn't just proof of an affair, it was a digital autopsy of her life. There were logs of her server access at the port, timestamps of every time she'd logged into work, and high-resolution surveillance photos of her, taken by her own husband from angles she hadn't noticed. The data pointed to a specific location, the hollowed-out base of a decorative obsidian statue in Marcus's private study. Zola didn't hesitate. She threw back the silk covers, her red pajamas catching the moonlight as she sprinted to the room, she usually respected as his private sanctuary. She tipped the statue over. A small, sleek burner phone slid out, its screen cold and incriminating. It wasn't locked. The last message thread was with a contact labeled VD. Access secured. Marcus had written only hours ago. The asset is unsuspecting. She's the perfect cover for the Incheon breach. Below it was a photo of Zola from their wedding day, her face circled in digital red. She wasn't his wife. She was an asset, a prop, a high-level tech key to a door the Viper Tong wanted to kick down. The burner phone slipped from her hand, clattering onto the marble floor. The man she had spent 2 years building a life with was a ghost, a predator who had hollowed out her heart to fill it with lies. In that moment, the naive woman who had sent a desperate text to save a marriage died. In her place, the strategist took over. She looked at the unknown number on her screen, the man from Seoul who had torn the veil away. He was dangerous, a shadow from a world she didn't understand, but right now, he was the only truth she had left. The air in Incheon International Airport was sterilized and sharp, a jarring contrast to the heavy, humid memories of Lagos Zola had left behind 16 hours ago. She moved through the gleaming terminal, her laptop bag slung over her shoulder like a shield. Every suit in the crowd looked like Marcus. Every flicker of a security camera felt like a predatory eye. She was a systems analyst who had spent her life navigating digital backdoors, but now she was the one being hunted in the physical world. As she reached the arrivals hall, the atmosphere shifted. 2 men in slate-gray jackets detached themselves from the glass and steel pillars, their movements too synchronized to be accidental. They didn't offer a greeting. "Mrs. Benjamin," the taller one said, his voice a low, grating rasp. "Your husband is concerned. He sent us to bring you home." The lie tasted like ash in Zola's throat. She took a step back, her heart hammering against her ribs. She saw the bulge of a weapon beneath the man's jacket and realized the home they were offering was a shallow grave. They reached for her, their fingers closing in like a trap, but they never made contact. The intervention was a burst of brutal poetry. From the shadows of the nearby terminal pillars, 3 figures in tailored black overcoats materialized with the fluid grace of ink dropping into water. It wasn't a brawl, it was a masterclass in lethal efficiency. There was no shouting, only the muffled thwack of bone hitting carbon fiber and the sickeningly rhythmic snap of joints being redirected. One of Jaha's men moved with a terrifying, dance-like precision, his hand catching a Viper Tong throat in midair, while his other arm swept the second assailant into the marble floor with enough force to crack the tile. In less than 10 seconds, the threat was neutralized. The attackers slumped into the shadows of a closed kiosk as if they had simply decided to sleep. The lead operative, a man with a jagged scar across his eyebrow, turned to Zola and bowed with chillingly perfect etiquette. He held up a phone screen. It displayed a single image, the floral tattoo of a dragon, identical to the one she had seen on Shin Jaeha's chest. "The chairman does not like his guests being disturbed," the operative said softly. "The car is waiting, Ms. Benjamin. Welcome to Seoul." The black sedan climbed through the swirling mists of the Bukhansan Mountains, leaving the neon pulse of Seoul far below. Zola watched the jagged granite peaks rise like the teeth of a sleeping giant. When the massive iron gates, engraved with the writhing, silver form of a white tiger, swung open, she felt she was crossing a threshold into a world where the laws of the modern world no longer applied. The compound was a paradox of ancient stone and cutting-edge glass, a fortress built on the edge of a precipice. Inside, the air smelled of cedar, cold rain, and the sharp ozone of high-end electronics. Shin Jae-ha was waiting for her in a room that felt more like a digital war room than a home. He stood before a wall of monitors that bathed his sharp, predatory features in a ghostly blue light. He had traded his dress shirt for a black silk vest, leaving his muscular arms bare to show the floral tattoos that seemed to crawl across his skin with every movement. "Welcome to the Dragon's Gate, Zola," he said, his voice a low, melodic vibration that seemed to settle in the marrow of her bones. He didn't offer a platitude or a hand to shake. He gestured toward the flickering screens. "This is the reality your husband has been hiding behind your marriage bed." Zola stepped forward, her eyes scanning the lines of code scrolling across the center monitor. Her breath hitched. It was her own work, the proprietary encryption protocols she had spent the last year developing for the Lagos Port Authority. But it had been gutted and re-engineered. "Operation Black Tide," Jeha explained, his dark eyes fixed on her. "Marcus didn't just marry you for your company. He married you for your mind. The Viper Tong is using your backdoor access to synchronize a cyber hijack of the Incheon port's automated systems. In 48 hours, they will override the digital locks of every liquid natural gas tanker currently docked. They aren't just looking for a payout, Zola. They're looking to turn the harbor into a crater, and they're using your digital signature to do it." The room seemed to tilt. Zola stared at the screen, seeing the blueprint of a massacre written in her own digital handwriting. Marcus hadn't just broken her heart. He had turned her life's work into a detonator. She looked up at Jeha, the man who should have been a stranger, and saw a reflection of her own cold, burgeoning fury in his gaze. "I built those locks," she whispered, her voice shedding its last trace of naivety. "And I'm the only one who knows how to burn the bridge Marcus is standing on." Jeha's smirk returned, slow and dangerous. "I was counting on that." The days at the mountain compound blurred into a relentless rhythm of digital warfare and physical exhaustion. Zola no longer wore red silk. She wore tactical black and a resolve that felt harder than the granite peaks surrounding her. She spent her mornings in the high-tech command center, her fingers dancing across keyboards with a lethal grace. She wasn't just looking for Marcus's digital footprint anymore. She was dismantling the Viper Tong's cardiovascular system. With the precision of a surgeon, she ghosted through their offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands and Singapore, rerouting millions into dead accounts and freezing their liquidity. Every keystroke was a strike against the man who had turned her life into a lie. Watching the numbers zero out felt better than any apology Marcus could ever offer. But Jeha knew that a war fought only behind a screen was a war half lost. In the late afternoons, the air in the private dojo grew thick with the scent of cedar and sweat. Jeha moved like a shadow, fluid, predatory, and terrifyingly fast. He didn't go easy on her because of her past. Instead, he used his size and strength to force her to find her own. "The world doesn't care about your heartbreak, Zola," he rasped, his chest pressed against her back as he corrected her stance, his tattooed arms wrapping around hers to guide a strike. "It only cares if you can survive the bite." The proximity was electric, a dangerous friction that made her heart race for reasons that had nothing to do with fear. When he threw her to the mat, she didn't cry. She scrambled back up, her eyes burning with a cold, new Lagos fire. She learned to use her lower center of gravity to unbalance men twice her size, turning her perceived weakness into a weapon. She learned the brutal poetry his men had displayed at the airport, how to strike the throat, how to break a grip, how to find the softest point of a hard man. By the end of the first week, the naive wife had been buried under a layer of bruises and high-level algorithms. Zola looked at her reflection in the glass of the server room and didn't recognize the woman staring back. Her wavy hair was pulled into a tight, practical knot, and her gaze was as sharp as a digital blade. She wasn't a prop anymore. She was the ghost in the machine, and she was coming for everything Marcus owned. The Grand Hyatt soul smelled of lilies and expensive betrayal. Zola walked through the gilded lobby, her heels clicking against the polished stone like a countdown. She wasn't the woman in the red satin pajamas anymore. She was draped in a structured, midnight blue gown that fit like armor, her long hair cascading over her shoulders in waves that felt more like a lion's mane than a crown. Beside her, though standing a respectful distance away, Jeha's presence was a silent, lethal shadow. When the elevator doors opened to the penthouse suite, the air shifted. Marcus was there, looking every bit the grieving husband, until he saw her. He rushed forward, his face a mask of simulated relief. "Zola, thank God. I've been out of my mind. These men, they told me you were kidnapped." "Stop, Marcus," Zola said, her voice a calm, digital chill that cut through his frantic acting. She didn't flinch as he reached for her. She simply stepped aside, revealing the woman standing by the window. The mistress. She was sharp, elegant, and holding a glass of champagne with a familiarity that suggested she had already claimed Zola's place. Marcus froze, his mask flickering. "Zola, listen, she's a colleague. We're in danger." "You're right about the danger, but you're lying about the source," Zola interrupted. She pulled a slim tablet from her clutch and slid it onto the marble coffee table. The screen flickered to life, displaying the black tide, logs, and a real-time feed of the Viper tongs draining offshore accounts. "I know about the Incheon breach. I know I was your asset. And I know that as of 5 minutes ago, you are worth exactly 0 to your handlers." The silence that followed was suffocating. Marcus's eyes darted to the mistress, whose expression had hardened into something predatory. The colleague wasn't a lover. She was his Viper Tong handler, and she looked ready to discard a failing tool. "You think you're smart?" Marcus hissed, his voice finally shedding its warmth to reveal the venom beneath. "You're a systems analyst, Zola. You play with numbers. You don't survive people like us." "I used to play with numbers," Zola replied, stepping closer until she could see the sweat on his brow. "Now, I've deleted yours. Every cent you moved, every backdoor you built, it's mine now. You didn't just marry a strategist, Marcus. You married the woman who is going to watch your empire burn from the inside out." She turned her back on him, the ultimate gesture of power. As she walked toward the door where Jeha waited, his hand resting casually on his jacket where a weapon was hidden, Zola didn't look back. She had spent 2 years loving a ghost. Now, she was the haunt. The Incheon port terminal was a labyrinth of steel containers and screaming wind, the air thick with the scent of sea salt and impending disaster. Rain lashed against the control room's reinforced glass as Zola slammed her ruggedized laptop into the central hub. On the massive monitors above, a digital countdown bled red, 1:45. Below the catwalk, the shadows moved. The Viper Tong hadn't sent negotiators. They had sent an execution squad to ensure the black tide went terminal. "Don't look back, Zola." Jeha's voice was a low, steady anchor amidst the rising sirens. He stepped into the center of the walkway, shedding his overcoat to reveal the floral tattoos coiling around his arms like living vines. He held a short, matte black blade in one hand, his posture relaxed, the terrifying calm of a predator who had finally found his prey. "Fix the world. I'll handle the monsters." Zola's fingers blurred across the keys. The code was a nightmare version of her own design, a distorted mirror of her brilliance. Marcus had layered the encryption in cycles of 3, a petty homage to their anniversary dates. It was a psychological trap designed to make her flinch. But Zola didn't flinch. She saw the logic, the gaps, and the arrogance in his syntax. Below her, the first wave of attackers hit. The sound was a rhythmic, sickening percussion, the crack of bone, the heavy thud of bodies hitting the grated floor, and the metallic ring of steel on steel. Jeha moved with a lethal, terrifying grace, a whirlwind of black silk and silver light. He was the dragon head in its truest form, a shield of violence standing between Zola and the abyss. 042. Almost there, Zola hissed, her eyes reflecting the scrolling green lines of the kill switch. She bypassed the final firewall, her fingers striking the enter key with the force of a gavel. "Access denied. Marcus," she whispered. The countdown froze at 3 seconds. Across the harbor, the groaning hydraulic locks of the massive LNG tankers shuddered and held. The digital bridge Marcus had built collapsed into a pile of corrupted data. Silence fell over the terminal, broken only by the heavy breathing of the two people left standing. Jeha climbed the stairs to the catwalk, his shirt torn and his knuckles stained, but his eyes were fixed solely on her. He didn't look at the screens. He looked at the woman who had just saved the city. Zola stood up, her laptop closing with a definitive snap. She wasn't the asset or the siren anymore. She was the architect of her own salvation. The Seoul skyline was a tapestry of electric blue and violet, a stark, beautiful contrast to the humid shadows of the Lagos penthouse Zola had left behind. She stood on the helipad of the Baekho Tower, the wind whipping her hair around a face that no longer carried the weight of heartbreak. The divorce from Marcus was a legal formality now. The real separation had happened the moment she chose her own brilliance over his lies. Beside her, Shin Jae-ha leaned against the railing, his white shirt unbuttoned at the collar, the dragon tattoos on his neck catching the neon moonlight. He wasn't her protector anymore. He was her equal. Over the last month, they had forged something formidable out of the wreckage. Zola's own cybersecurity firm, operating from the heart of Seoul and anchored by the Baekho Syndicate's reach. "You're thinking about the first message," Jae-ha said, his voice a low, knowing rumble that vibrated through the cool night air. Zola smiled, a sharp, confident expression that would have terrified the woman she used to be. "I'm thinking about how much a single digit can change the world. If my thumb hadn't slipped, I'd still be in that Victoria Island penthouse, waiting for a ghost to come home." "It wasn't a mistake, Zola," Jae-ha replied, his hand finding hers. His grip was warm, calloused, and steady. "It was fate realizing you were in the wrong story." The moment was interrupted by the familiar, sharp hum of her phone. Zola pulled it from her pocket, expecting a server update. Instead, the screen displayed a restricted number. An image file downloaded automatically, pixelating into view with agonizing clarity. Her breath hitched, but she didn't tremble. It was a high-resolution surveillance photo of her and Jae-ha on this very balcony, taken from a neighboring skyscraper. A digital red circle was drawn around their joined hands. Below the image, a single line of text appeared. "The dragon has a new heart. The viper has 1,000 tails. We're waiting for you in Tokyo." Zola didn't flinch. She didn't look for cover. She simply looked at Jae-ha, whose eyes had already turned into shards of cold, predatory flint. The war hadn't ended at the Incheon terminal. It had merely gone global. Marcus had been a pawn, and the true players were finally stepping out of the shadows. "Tokyo?" Jae-ha asked, his thumb grazing her knuckles as he looked toward the horizon. Zola tapped a command on her phone, already deploying a recursive trace on the sender's signal. "Prep the jet, Jae-ha," she said, her voice echoing with the soul-deep power of a woman who had finally found her match. "We have a legacy to build,